competent patient. But if the patient is competent, then of course it goes back to him to decide. However, in most cases, from my observation and from my research activities, I realized that in most cases, most of the decisions, they leave to the doctors to decide. Yes, thank you.
Okay, maybe one more question. I would request both the questions and the answers to be brief, considering the shortage of time. So, okay, if there are no more questions, we can pass on to the next. Is there any more question? Okay. So the next paper is Ethics in Clinical Trial for AIDS Vaccine and Antiretroviral Drugs, Patient Perspectives in Thailand. And this will be presented by Dr. Niada Catherine Ansuri. It's co-authored by Nipatra Harithavan. So I request Dr. Niada to.
Good afternoon, Professor Gupta and the organizers and colleagues. I'm sorry I put it in the wrong folder. Finally, I found it. I come from Social Pharmacy Research Unit at Chulalongkorn University, so it's a pharmacist background. I would like to start with this cartoon that I borrowed from the cartoonstop.com. It said, do a double blind test, give the new drug to rich patients and a placebo to the poor. No sense getting their hopes up, they couldn't afford it even if it works. So it's quite obvious, isn't it? But in reality that we have to be very concerned in ethics issue. It is very obvious, yeah. And especially when we are working with clinical trials in AIDS patient and especially for the injecting drug user, the vulnerable group, the marginalized group, we have to be very concerned. And since we have been doing some work with injecting drug user and AIDS patient before, and we found some ethical issues that inspire us to explore more into this area, especially with their own perspective. So I mean the patient perspective, not as the professional one or the public health one. This study is being prepared for review by the ethical committee, so it didn't start yet. So we need a lot of your comment. Concern the HIV/AIDS in Thailand, the first report in 1984. Right now we have the cumulative. In 2005, around 1,050,000 have already died, and the prevalence of HIV in IDU is around 40 to 50%. And this is a very good sample to be a participant in the clinical trials. Comparing the healthcare structure in Thailand, this is a good coverage. We have lots of community hospital up to the university hospital. We have medical school, pharmacy school, and then we have universal coverage for ARV to the patient as a pyramid from the UC up to the research, which is our interest. And then come to the point that now we are open to clinical trials of ARV and HIV vaccine in our countries, whether it's in care, in treatment, or in prevention. So here are some pictures of the ARV and AIDS trial in Thailand with the Ministry of Health, University, Thai Red Cross, Bangkok Metropolitan Administration, and also with the US Army. And the center is all over the country. Some example of HIV vaccine trial in Thailand is of vaccine, around 2005 participants and reported to be failed in 2003. The other two are ongoing, which is Xenophobia in Bangkok and the Prime Boost HIV vaccine, which is a very big trial. 16,000 healthy people are recruiting at the moment. Here are some examples of ARV clinical trials in PHPT and the HIV in the AIDS area. These are some points, the difference between HIV vaccine trial and ARV trial. The first one participant HIV vaccine will be HIV negative, only. But in the risk group, like in Thailand, we have the IDU. In some countries, you may find commercial sex worker or MSM in the trial. But for the ARV trial, we have to have only HIV positive patient. So the aim to prevent for HIV vaccine and the treatment for ARV trial. And here are the bioethic arena in Thailand about how the trial going on. We have researcher at the middle, linked closely to the sponsors at the institute and also to the IRB, but quite also with the patients. We don't have national review board at the moment, so as the law. So we somehow we use the international code into our regulatory system, which I will discuss later on. But for the AIDS patient, they have the community that should be taken into account when we are talking about their role in the trials. And for international bioethics, you already know as well from Nuremberg Code 1947. Just only one this UNS guideline on HIV vaccine research to 2000 that's focus on the issue that we are discussing at the moment. Since 1983, but until now, is still as a draft. So we don't have the law governing this, but we use the Council Code of Ethics, Code of Conduct of Research, and we have the Thai Research Council guideline, which is only a guideline, not a law. We use the Declaration of Thai Patients' Rights endorsed by 4 professional council and the ministry, and we sometimes use criminal law and civil law as well. So the Declaration of Thai Patient Rights, we have 10 points. The one that related to the research is as this. The patient is entitled to demand complete current information regarding his role in the research and the risk involved in order to make decision to participate in or withdraw from the medical research being carried out by their healthcare provider. So it's a question, whether it's a treatment or a research. It's still in doubt sometimes. When we come back to the HIV vaccine trial diagram, we have HIV negative and end up with both positive and negative. And we have to weigh between the risk and the benefit. So some ethical issues, right, in the placebo arm, the risk of behavior to get HIV positive, how can we deal with them when they finish the trial or even between the trial? Or even the IDU when they participated in the trial, then they were arrested and put into jail, and that will be discontinuation. What's going on with them, how to deal with them. So there are some reports discussed on this issue already. Then about the ARV trial diagram, we have HIV positive, but then we end up with the all positive, but might be no effect or effect depend on the ARV. And then we have to, and especially for the ARV, that's quite very toxic to the organ or to the body. And especially for the ARV, it is important that it is essential and you have to take the drug throughout your whole life. If you stop, then you have to die. And then you have to use very punctual and continuous, otherwise it will create resistance. And into the trial, when they finish, how about after the trial? How can they take the drug or second line or third line drugs? And especially the trial with vulnerable groups, stigmatized and discrimination will create a lot of problems with them. So when we taking ethical consideration into account, some people mentioned that we have to start from IRB approval, whether it's bias or quality of the approval process. And when we look at the sensitive issue and whether we should take the placebo or standard treatment. So this will take this to the patient if we have the placebo, which means they can receive HIV at any time. The recruitment process, whether it's a coerced to join or whether they have the fear because they have the contact with the health service already, they're not This is also another problem. Informed consent, information they receive before making decision, and then after that information between the trial, how to have the risk reduction or harm reduction together with the ARV or the HIV also have to think about. The other consideration is how to handle those who cannot enroll or fail the inclusion criteria, and we found out that they are HIV positive or they get HIV infected during the trial. How can we handle? Throw them away because it's the exclusion criteria, or treat them, or what else? The adverse event, which is a lot of problem with the ARV, how can we treat them? The resistance are very major problem. If they get resistant during the trial or after the trial, they have to use the high price ARV. How can we manage with them? And the other thing, after the trial, how can they go to test, to take the OI treatment or another ARV provision, the first line, second line, third line, and throughout their whole life, and also about the benefit to the country. I heard that some try they test in one country, but then they deny to register in that country. So we are guinea pig, but we could not use the drug. So I have some patient experience that I received from my previous work. He said like it, I found one mentioned they enrolled into trials at the same time because they couldn't find enough participants and they didn't ask anything about their position. Or some patients take the drug half but then deny to take it orally, but then they went back for the meeting and then asked another drug. Or some IDU, they said, oh, I hardly use the drug now, but they asked me to join. Then I could not deny, so I come. And I need the methadone. They have to go one by one because they need the ARV. So they finish this one and go to another one. So the patient perspective that we would like to ask, how they were convinced, which information they received during the trial, can they tell the name of the ARV of their trial, or how many trials they already involved. I heard 2 or 3 of them. And then this is the proposal that we have to think about human rights approach. We propose the community advisory board, the recruitment process during the trial, medical insurance, system of management of ARV, and benefit back to the country, accessible and the knowledge. So I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Very interesting paper. Maybe we could have some questions, 1 or 2.
How many patients did you have a chance to talk to? And was there a difference between those in Bangkok and those in the rural areas? And did you have a chance to access in the rural areas?
I didn't start yet for my project, waiting for the review and for the funding. But we have talked to some, probably 5 of them, or I attend one conference for the draft law, and one patient talk about their participating in the subject. So just only a few that I can get at the moment. But we plan to interview at least 50 in both in Bangkok and in the area around, which I have contact already to the group of NGO who collaborate those patients in Chonburi, Rayong, and in Chiang Mai.
You mentioned the responsibilities to patients after the trial. Have you considered what responsibility the patients have to the trial? That is, if they stop their medicines, resistance could develop, which puts the whole community at risk. Not just them, but the whole community. So should there be, and have you considered what responsibility the participants have to the trial? That is, if they stop, should they be dropped from the trial? And so on. Because we've always looked at it from one side. What about the other side of the equation?
The patient, yes. In fact, they have to, if they understand enough, one thing that their role how can they make benefit from their participating in the trial. And also they have to know the adverse event from that one, the risk of participating, and then they have to have their honest if they accept to be. But then if they could not survive to tolerate, they have the right to stop as well. But that's the risk, that's I'm concerned too. Then how can we manage for the risk of that with the trial? Because in any trial, you can stop at any time during the trial, don't you? But I mean, if those patients already, managed very well in the trials, they may have some second-line drugs, and then after that, how can they survive? Because they already pay their role, not for themselves. I heard one paper mention that, they already benefit from taking part into the trials, but then they also benefit to the patients, to the institute, to the company as well. So how about the way back? Because if they could not use the drug properly after the trials, that will create also the problem with the resistance too.
Thank you. If there are no more questions, maybe we can move on to the next presentation by Dr. Ali Reza Bagheri. Externally sponsored research in developing countries, a challenge for research ethics committees.
Days, Iranian New Year Day, and I'm happy to present my paper here actually today. It's my second time presenting a paper in the same day. My focus in my presentation will be on externally sponsored research in developing countries as a challenge for research ethics committees. I will start with a brief introduction, and then I will talk about externally sponsored research and why we need to have more attention on these kind of researches. And then I will move on explaining some international guidelines regarding international externally sponsored research, and also the role of ethics committees, how to deal with this kind of proposals coming from outside. And finally, the conclusion, which will be emphasized on capacity building, and also a suggestion to have an ethics committee specifically charged for this kind of researches. There is no doubt that for improving healthcare, biomedical research is an essential component. But emerging issues that many developing countries have been targeted as a host countries for clinical trials on human subjects in those countries. It's been emphasized that because of inequalities in resources and power between externally sponsored of research and developing countries, there is a real risk of exploitation in the context of externally sponsored research. In different parts of the world, there is different health problems and needs. What patients in Asia or Sub-Saharan Africa are suffering is different from health needs in North America, for example. But the mainstream research activities in developed countries do not reflect the illnesses which people in developing countries are suffering from. The so-called 10-90 gap tries to put attention on the fact that less than 10% of the global health research funds is devoted to the research which regarding health problems that accounts for 90% of the global disease burden. Externally sponsored research projects refer to research conducted in whole or in part by a foreign sponsor. It can be a part of a multinational or bilateral collaboration between sponsoring countries and a country in the developing world. However, the common feature of these kind of research is human subjects are recruited from a developing country. There are various reasons which developed countries are willing to conduct their research in developing countries, such as the cost of research in those countries is less than developed countries. It's cheap compared to what they have to spend in their own country. And also accessibility of human subjects, and also in many cases there is a lack of compensation policy in those countries. And also it's easy to get acceptance from local ethics committees in poor population attributes to research, such as genetic or ethnic factors which researchers would like to do survey on. But the question is whether there is a real collaboration between researchers in developed and developing countries or not. In many cases, researchers in developing countries are actually not real collaborators, but they are sample collectors for their research proposals. And there are many reasons for researchers in developing countries to accept this type of collaborations, such as publication, training. Therefore, there is a mutual gain for researchers in developed and developing countries. And that's why it makes to think about externally sponsored research very carefully, because the human subjects in those countries may be sacrificed because of this mutual interest or differences. You may have heard about an over-researched community, for example, in rural community in an African country. This case is about a rural area in African country, which in mid-90s, an international funded HIV vaccine, they found a community with 28% of HIV prevalence for antenatal clinics. And then, accordingly, they conducted a research survey, which possibly phase 1 and phase 2 of this study have been conducted, but phase 3 been withdrawn. After the withdrawal of this initiative, various health research initiatives took place in this region. And again, in 2003, another international HIV survey was trying to be conducted there, which was in fact a randomized placebo-controlled trial. But the local ethics committee declined permission to commence this study on the ground that they regarded this community as over the research community. These are most controversial issues in externally sponsored research. For example, standard of care, whether local or international standards should be applied. Availability, accessibility, and affordability is another concern. Which of them should be considered in the protocol or negotiation between these two parties? Whether they have to just make the product of the research available, or it should be accessible, or it should be not only available, but it should be affordable for people to can purchase to use these medications or any methods. Another issue is compensation policy, and also post-trial access to the effective interventions. Another issue is how to respect cultural diversity when a research protocol comes from outside. I would mention that there is a lack of empirical data to show how ethics committees are dealing with these kind of proposals. In an attempt by some of my colleagues in Iran, Dr. Larijani and his colleagues, and also in Japan, which was conducted by myself and Dr. Maser, we try to deal with externally sponsored research proposals. There's no time to explain all the data which we gathered, but one of the questions which we asked the ethics committee, we wanted to know what most they are concerned about when they review a proposal coming from foreign sponsor. For example, whether research topic is one of the country's health priority, is concerned about compensation or not. Post-trial access to effective intervention, and also observance of justice in subjects selection was another concern which we asked them. There are several international ethical guidelines to address the issue of externally sponsored research, particularly in developing countries. But still, there is a lack of empirical data to show how ethics committees in developing countries are dealing with this kind of protocols. The last revision was 2000. It emphasizes on benefit to local population access to the best proven prophylactic or therapeutic methods. SIOM's guidelines also, the last revision was 2002. It emphasizes on the strengthening of local capacity for ethics review and obligation to sponsors to provide healthcare services. Norfolk Council on Bioethics also it emphasizes to set up a national priority for developing countries and also securing post-trial access to effective interventions. The last one, which is UNESCO Bioethics Declaration 2005, also emphasizes on benefit sharing and social responsibility. Just skip some slides. But it seems the role of ethics committees, either in sponsoring a country or in host country, it's really important how they take the responsibility to review these kind of proposals. But either in sponsoring countries or ethics committee in host countries, they should make every effort to ensure direct and indirect benefit to the local population, to respect the socio-cultural issues, and also it's very important to get to know what is the research priority in that particular countries, and also the development of local infrastructure. To be able to review these kind of proposals, it's important. In any collaboration, there is a fear of exploitation will undermine the constructive effort, particularly in less powerful developing countries. Protection of human subjects' responsibilities lies with the researchers as well as ethics committees in both, again, sponsoring country and the host country. In many less resources countries, ethics in research, especially dealing with externally sponsored research, is relatively a new subject and underdeveloping. Another issue is capacity building, which has to be emphasized in ethics review, especially in research collaboration. I think the capacity building is required not only in ethics review for host country, but also in sponsoring countries. And the researchers from the other side of the globe, when they come to Asia or when they go to Africa, it needs to get more knowledge about their culture, their values, and how they think, how they live, and then they can conduct research based on respecting the local communities' values and cultures. Another issue, it seems that to do a good job for ethics committee regarding externally sponsored research, it seems if there is a possibility of, or if there is a national ethics committee, it seems giving this responsibility to that committee or having an ethics committee specifically charged with this task, I think it would help a lot. When you have an ethics committee which they are completely aware of the issues surrounding externally sponsored research, then they can do a good job. They can review that proposal better. Instead of giving opportunity to sponsoring institutes or researchers even to go to a rural area, a rural hospital, to conduct research and deal with an ethics committees which the infrastructure, even in the capital city or those countries, the ethics committees or even the research institutes in the big cities. When we doubt about, thank you for your attention.
Thank you. We have just time for just one question.
Thank you. I think that's a very important paper. Perhaps could I suggest that it might be an idea to make a compulsory rule that both the host country, that a project should pass an ethics committee in the host country, and also a double-pronged one in the sponsoring country, so that there is two ethics committees that need to pass before anything can happen.
But there are some, thank you for your question, there are some international in the sponsoring country first, and also local committee has to review the proposal. But the thing is that the standard is different from each other. The ethical standards which in reviewing a protocol by ethics committee in a sponsoring country in a developing country is sometimes it's different, and their capacity to review is different from the capacity of ethics committees in developing countries, and that's why sometimes it may crash between these two. But how to protect human subjects and to be sure about benefit sharing, access to the product of the research when the research is done. These are the questions which the ethics committee, local ethics committee has to look at this issue seriously to make a guarantee for local community that they will have access. There is no harm to them, and they are protected by these local ethics committees. And that's why the responsibility of local ethics committee, I would say, it's more than a sponsoring country.
You would have to make the...
Still, it seems still it's not, but it can be a suggestion.
Thank you. Okay, maybe this will be the last question.
A national research trying to figure out, they go to a central research ethical committee in the Ministry of Health, which can go to a local research ethical committee in a hospital or in the medical school or something like this.
If it's a big project, as far as I know, it has to go through the National Ethics Committee. But still, researchers from outside have opportunity to approach researchers directly even. And that's why my concern is when they can access to medical doctors or researchers in the local community, then there is a risk that their or a local or a rural research institutes directly. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. We pass on to the next, and this will be presented by Dr. Devjani Mukherjee.
Thank you, everybody. And the title of my talk is Ethical Considerations in International Traumatic Brain Injury Research. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I'm based in Chicago. For this academic year, I'm actually in Calcutta, India, doing a research project. And this is a very preliminary thinking about some of the dilemmas that I have faced as doing this research. So what I'm going to do today is very quickly talk a little bit about traumatic brain injury, some of the ethical and cross-cultural issues, and then describe this project and talk about some of the research dilemmas, and leave you with some questions to ponder, and hopefully a discussion over the next couple of days. So traumatic brain injury is an international public health problem. It's kind of a double-edged sword where with improvements in medical technology, we have more people surviving very serious car accidents and other kinds of injuries. So this has led to a lot of unprecedented ethical dilemmas. You'll often hear about ethical dilemmas about withdrawal of life support after brain injury. You'll hear about people in persistent vegetative state. But primarily, people who have traumatic brain injury usually recover and go back to the community, even though a lot of the ethical debates are about people with very serious brain injury. Brain injuries are caused by motor vehicle accidents, falls, assaults with and without firearms. They are, people with brain injury with brain damage have a variety of consequences. They can have problems with memory, attention, concentration. They can become impulsive. They can sometimes have dramatic personality changes, and people have described people after brain injury as almost being like a different person. And there are, the adjustment process is very dynamic. Now, while the brain and biological injury would be same the world over, you can imagine that the particulars in different countries about the access to medical care, about the long-term services, may influence the way that people adjust to brain injury. There are a variety of ethical issues in research with brain injury, and I just wanted to touch upon these. This slide itself could eat up my whole 10 minutes, so I won't go into it too much. I've been working with people with brain injury since 1991. I started off working as a psychometrist, who is a person who gives neuropsychological tests. And then I went on and got my master's and PhD, and then I did a postdoc in clinical ethics. And throughout, the issues around brain injury are very interesting because of the changes in the person's, it's a sudden and dramatic alteration. It's not a progressive, it may be me or you who leaves here and gets in a car accident and ends up with a brain injury. And there are some dramatic changes afterwards. Some of the issues are the assessment of decision-making capacity, which is not a global concept, but dependent on which question at what time. For example, some people may be able to consent for more simple decisions, but not be able to for more complicated ones. Another ethical issue is what they call therapeutic misconception. Sometimes people will assume that they're being involved in research because it'll benefit them therapeutically, and you often have to take this into consideration when you're working with people who have some cognitive impairments or without cognitive impairments. There's also this consideration of pre-injury and post-injury selves and interests. There's a lot written on this. This idea of if someone makes wishes or projects what they want for the future, once they have the injury, are those interests still relevant? And there's a lot of debate about that. There have been some famous US cases about these kind of issues. And finally, addressing biases and stigma associated with cognitive disability. There are, at least in the United States and in lots of countries in the world, there are a lot of negative connotations of people with brain injury and people having cognitive disabilities. So this is also another issue in research. As far as international or cross-cultural issues, there's a large body of literature in medical anthropology across and within cultures. So these are just some of the areas that may differ when you go into a different culture. There may be different conceptions of what's healthy and what's ill, of what makes somebody healthy or what makes somebody ill. There might be different norms for communication of information, about how you make decisions, about access to health care, about the importance of social roles, about family involvement in health care, and about religious and spiritual beliefs about health and illness. We've seen a lot of this over the past couple of days across a lot of presentations. So now I just want to quickly move on to my project and discuss some of the ethical dilemmas or research issues. So right now I'm based in Kolkata or Calcutta, India, which is in the northeast, and I'm looking at long-term adjustment to traumatic brain injury. I'm interested in satisfaction with life and environmental factors. And I have a couple of questionnaires, and I mostly do open-ended, in-depth interviews. And I've only actually worked. So one of the first issues, as soon as I got to India, was this idea of translating the measures. So I took this American scale that's used all over the world, and I wanted to actually just have a Bengali version because a lot of people may not be understanding the English to answer these questions. So I sat down with the professor and the graduate student and went, or if I could change my life over, I would change almost nothing. These kind of like psychological or complicated concepts, first of all, if you do a literal word-by-word translation, the same words might not exist in these two languages, and then you may lose the nuance of the question. Health, and it's a vulnerable population, so all these people reviewed the project and decided that it was okay for me to do the project. And then I'm a faculty member at Northwestern University in the States, so I had to go through the Institutional Review Board in Chicago. And I have Indian collaborators. This process took so long. And I sat down with one of the grad students who's working with me to go through the Institutional Review Board computer training, and she has to read about the Department of Health and Human Services guidelines. I mean, some things are really, obviously really important, but it's kind of one of those moments where she's just looking at me and saying, how does this have anything to do with my research, my studies, or your project? anyways, that's kind of a neither here nor there. I don't think it's something you should do away with, but it's an interesting dilemma. Besides the fact that our computer connection kept failing and we would be like halfway through a module and it took us probably 3 or 4 times longer to do it than you would expect. Recruiting participants has been another issue. I'm looking at people more than 5 years post-injury, and because of the phone numbers in Calcutta have all changed, and so it's impossible to find some of the people from their old phone numbers. I don't know if you have this in other parts of Asia, but it's kind of hard to find people and also to work within social networks. So that's been something that I was worried about coercion. I was worried about, how would I ask people, but I actually am having trouble even finding them, which I don't know if that's an ethical dilemma, but definitely a difficult situation. The other thing that I've been struggling a lot with is these differing notions of privacy. This is a very different take on privacy from what the panel yesterday discussed, but I've been thinking a lot about this issue. What I found helpful was a distinction by Allen, who distinguished among 4 different types of privacy: physical, informational, proprietary, and decisional. So physical may be everything from having a private hospital room to your bodily integrity, and informational was discussed yesterday. So as a quality in responding to the questions, in the one person's home, I actually moved to a different room and the whole family followed us in there. So the research participants' sense of privacy was, this is completely normal, this is what I do, so I just took her cue on it. But it's very interesting because the IRB was concerned about this information and who would know it, and really, in fact, the whole community had access to it. Then the other thing that's been kind of interesting is the privacy of the researcher. Thanks. They've asked me if both my parents are Indian. They've asked me all sorts of questions. And I've been working with people for many years in the States, and people don't really ask those kind of questions when you're a researcher. So, I mean, I am of Indian origin, and a lot of the interviews happen in Bengali, and it can be very informal, but I remember the one time I was sitting there and this woman said, completely at a loss for any words, but I just said, I'm not really sure how to respond, and moved on to the next question. But this idea of the privacy of the researcher is something that I was confronted with. The other issue is the power differential. The power differentials. There are a lot of differentials. I mean, just being a woman, being a Hindu, being an American, being lots of different categories all at once. And it's interesting when I'm in the clinic doing the interviews and I'm introduced as Dr. Debjani Mukherjee and I'm introduced by a neurosurgeon, I think I have one interaction with that power differential is when I go into someone's home and I'm kind of welcomed there as a visitor. Thanks. Okay, the use of consent forms, establishing a man who started going into his whole description of his problems in the research project before he signed the consent form, and I kept telling him, well, I need to have you do this because I'm here for research. And he told me, I don't trust people, I'm not signing that piece of paper, but I'll tell you anything you want to know. I don't believe in giving my signature. And I said, but I really need you to do this because I work in the United States and there's a regulation and I need you to sign this piece of paper. He said, no, I'm old. I'm stuck in this cross-cultural dilemma where I'm like, I totally agree with this guy. I'm sure that he shouldn't trust most people who come into his home. Meanwhile, he is talking on and on about my research questions. Eventually, he did give his initials instead of his signature on the consent form, but it was one of those other moments of research dilemmas. And I think that plays into the idea of how you establish trust and your communication style and expectations. So I'm going to leave you with just some questions to ponder because I think I'm out of time. What does it mean to respect persons? I think we have a lot of guidelines about how you respect persons, but when you're in the field and working with people, it can mean very different things. How do we balance the requirements of Western research oversight with the cultural realities of non-Western contexts? How can you have some guidelines but also some flexibility for the researcher? How do we work with families and systems to understand complex phenomena? And how do different notions of privacy influence the research? Feedback from you, probably not in the time allotted, but maybe throughout the rest of the conference. And I also want to acknowledge my collaborators, Dr. Untitled Chatterjee, Dr. Joyinti Basu, and Kamalika Rai, who are all based in Calcutta. Thanks.
So, thank you very much, Dr. Mukherjee. And maybe, yeah.
Just a quick one.
Yes?
Yeah.
It crossed my mind listening to the drama you've been through. Would it not have been easy to transfer responsibility for this research to Calcutta University, where I was a student for 3 years?
No, actually the Calcutta University Department of Applied Psychology doesn't have the Institutional Ethics Review Board for this kind of project, and since I'm on the faculty of Northwestern, I didn't have a choice. But that would be another solution, but I don't know that it would get around some of the on the ground.
Amir from your neighborhood, Pakistan. It's not a question, it's more of a comment about the invasion of your privacy as a researcher.
Yeah.
It's not actually at all an invasion of your privacy. These were not at all meant to be.
No, I know.
These are the concept of privacy is very, very different in our neighborhood, in our region. As the panel yesterday was actually a European panel of privacy. Our concepts are different. Somebody is not having a baby after getting married. People will ask, what's the problem? Is it with you? Is it with your wife? These are not at all private questions.
Yeah.
They're not regarded. So they're asking you whether you're married or why you're not married, and what's the problem? You want to marry a white person or whatever. So concepts are different. The concept about also the informed consent and a person not wanting to write is also a very fundamental issue in the research that we undertake in our part of the world, because many people don't know how to read and write. So they don't know what you're signing. They would be very willing to take part in research, but are hesitant in signing anything because who knows what you're making them sign. So that's just a comment.
Actually, I have two responses. One is that I completely expected from my friends and family. I've spent a lot of time in South Asia. Random strangers ask me it, but I think when I put on my research hat and went in to do the interviews, it still took me aback. I think it's one of those qualitative research or relationship issues. I'm used to it, believe me, everywhere, even in Buffalo, New York. This person was extremely literate. He was bilingual, but he just didn't want to. He was very adamant about older people getting exploited. But I think that you're right that these are very particular to this cultural context.
How the cultural anthropologists, some of the cultural anthropologists may give you the more effective information.
Absolutely. A lot of the ethnographic school, so I think that's also part of some of my struggles with privacy I've been thinking about, and I actually just finished a book chapter on that in ethnographic research. But it's also the fact that I'm in between various fields, so I have to go through the medical institutional review board, which is more typical for the kind of research that's been described already, where they worry about different issues than my kind of work. So, but thank you, everybody.
So the next paper is on ethical issues in post-disaster clinical interventions and research by Dr. Atula Sumatipala.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, may I ask for your permission to do my talk? Thank you very much for the opportunity given. I just have to warn you in advance, I am wearing my Sri Lankan hat for this presentation because it's important. Particularly because I actually coordinated the post-tsunami psychosocial work in Sri Lanka after I was invited by the Sri Lankan government to lead the psychosocial desk at the National Center for National Operations following tsunami. Just to show you that what we are presenting here today is not have just fallen from the sky, it's grounded within the work we carried out. And in fact, my colleague here and our research group abandoned all our research temporarily and volunteered to coordinate that. And I gave my London work for 10 months. And we did things voluntarily. So that's the background to this presentation. On behalf of Working Group on Disaster Research, it's a multidisciplinary group with expertise in ethics.
and it's important again to show you who the actors and players are. You know Daryl, who is here. Leo, Amar, Jeffrey, all of them are here. And Nandini Kumar from India, Asim Ahmed from Pakistan, and Saratendra Singh from Sri Lanka. Cesar, who is a physician who also coordinated the psychosocial work full time. Sutario from Indonesia, Chandra and Jayasekar and Sriyakant, both of them have got their MScs from Monash Bioethics. And this is the background. Next slide. In fact, we invited some other colleagues from Sri Lanka, and some of them had other prior commitments. People like Professor Anoja Fernando couldn't make it, but we will involve the other colleagues in Sri Lanka who have the expertise. And the work was funded by the Wellcome Trust. Next slide, please. It's very important to know the process. Again, as I mentioned, and because these were not done behind closed doors. And we had a very large disaster research and ethics meeting in Colombo in January, which we involved the government. You can see the Honorable Minister, Disaster Management, the National Science Foundation, the universities, and the resource people. It was part of the work I'm presenting today. Next slide, please. And we had the inauguration. Professor Fernando is there, and we had a large audience. This was partly a public awareness raising program as well. And we also had a basic and advanced course of bioethics, and under the title of ethics as a friend of research, because we discuss here the polarization of ethics on one side and research on one side. We wanted to show that these two are complementary things, not opponents. And this is the critical mass we train in a basic course and advanced course, because we had a basic course the previous year, and this is the critical mass we train. So that's one of the ways of awareness raising. And after that, we had very intensive discussion, debate for 2 days. The close group of experts from the region who were working within the field of ethics. So we had very intensive discussions, briefings, reporting back, and which continued actually up to now through emails. And you would see it in the page 36 abstract. I'm not going to present the whole thing. I'm going to pick up few things. And it's very important to tell you why this meeting and the draft and how all this came into being. As we know, if disaster research is important and can be done ethically, why would we have to come out with draft guidelines? Why would unethical research take place? Partly unintentional, due to lack of awareness, not sensitive to the specific ethical issues, and does not consider ethics as part of essential components of research. So that is what we call ignorance, which has to be defeated through awareness raising. But the most dangerous part is the arrogance, intentional, conflict of interest, exploitation of vulnerable survivors deliberately for easy and cheap research, and lack of respect for survivors. Next slide, Swin. And unfortunately, tsunami was a very good ground for parachute research and exploitation. I have left this booklet there, people can pick it up. Very briefly, there was a Japanese group collecting blood in one of the camps in one of the sort of down south, where we had to put a stop to collection of blood, but they managed to smuggle some of them, and in fact, they are abstract coming up on those research. Although we stopped, unfortunately, they got hold of a research ethics committee chairman who got his son to apply, and they gave expedited review. And the alarming thing was the Japanese team annexed ethical clearance, which was taken in 2003, tsunami happened 2004, as evidence for sponsoring country. The review, I wouldn't go into details, this was discussed in Indian Council for Medical Research workshop. All the attendees agreed 100% that every basic, again Swedish collecting blood data from survivors in the camps after taking permission from police. I'm sure that doesn't happen in Sweden, and I can go on, and this happened in Pakistan, this happened in Philippines. Next slide. And again, it's not only ethics in research, as my colleague mentioned about the clinical ethics. Large number of foreign organizations and individuals came without any understanding whatsoever within the context of humanitarian aid, and I had to speak to people who were French, who couldn't speak English. they came to do counseling. So what did we agree in this particular meeting held in Colombo among ourselves? We agreed that disasters happen and all the destruction, death, disease, displacement, disappearance, disarray, distress, all this happen. Every of this has its own ethical implications and issues. So therefore we felt that post-disaster research is important, and we had disaster planning and prevention, evidence-based management. Next slide please. In fact, it may be unethical not to conduct research in such situations, since ethical research that takes into account the needs and priorities of affected communities must be encouraged and promoted. We agreed on that. However, it has to be performed in an ethical manner, planned preferably well in advance, particularly if the disasters are recurring. Research proportion should be carefully scrutinized for the level of risk and the significance of proposed research. Such scrutiny may result in need for additional procedural safeguards, particularly because people are vulnerable. And there are concerns that research had been carried out without proper scientific rigor or ethical standards, both, particularly during planned exploitative international collaborations. Next slide. When research is combined particularly with aid, relief, at times clinical care, there is undue inducement for participation in this vulnerable population. I want to reiterate the word vulnerable. I'll come to that. Why? Additional safeguards are needed to protect the vulnerable as well as to facilitate high-quality research given the nature and scale of disasters and the complexities of the issues related to healthcare and research. The therapeutic misconception my colleague mentioned is very important. Participants should be made very clear whether this therapeutic intent or whether it's pure research to reduce the likelihood of participants mistaking research for clinical care. Next. The global divide and disparities that already exist within societies become more exaggerated in disasters, especially in the developing countries. But we saw this in New Orleans, where the maldistribution of resources, whether it's a developed country, but particularly in developing. Disasters by their very nature results in vulnerability in individuals and in societies. We want to stress that because the meeting held after 9/11 in New York Academy of Medicine, sponsored by them and National Institute of Mental Health, felt that disaster-affected survivors are not necessarily vulnerable because of the asymmetry of knowledge and authority between the researchers and the participants, particularly in the developing world. So these issues should be equally, if not more important for the developing world, and we appeal to the international research community as well as to ethicists. They should take serious concern and look at it and do something about it. Next slide, please. Few more slides. The one before, please. Existing guidelines and norms pertaining to research on human participants may not be sufficient to address all these situations, and therefore greater vigilance is necessary in disaster-related research to ensure that the general ethical principles are adhered to and participants are protected. We admit that there are accepted national and international guidelines, but in addition to them, we urge researchers to pay particular attention to following ethical principles when conducting research in disaster-affected situations. These guidelines are meant to supplement and the relevant existing national and international ones. Disaster setting, we don't think it justifies doing it under disaster situation because that is not disaster specific. So that's one example. Again, informed consent and voluntariness, survivors of disaster situation are particularly vulnerable. We stress that particularly in the developing world. By definition, we think it should be. And again, the requirement for research on children affected by disasters cannot be ruled out. However, due to their greater vulnerability, the researchers will have to justify the need to use children as research participants. The informed consent process will have to incorporate mechanisms of proxy consent by their parents or guardians, that is additional safeguards. And again, on exploitation, the selection of research participants must be made on scientific reasons and not based on easy accessibility, cost, gender, or malleability. Next slide, the final one. Ethics review, we admit clear, but it should be an exceptional situation, but should be conducted with extreme caution. This expeditious review must follow the standard procedures, considering the guideline mentioned above, and dissemination of results we believe should be in open access journals, because when we map all the research, it find most of the disaster-related research is available in non-accessible journals, and international collaborations have to have a local partner, although it's the case in other things, but particularly in disaster situation. I think that's it. So what would happen next? We don't claim this to be a universally acceptable thing coming from the developing world. We don't do that. That's why we are here to present it to you. We are circulating it. We are going to many stakeholders, organizations, individuals, experts. We want to develop consensus and come to a guideline which can be implemented and followed and respected by people, particularly in our part of the world. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. I have a few more questions. Okay, very brief, please.
Thank you, Tula. I was involved with the team, so we need to take these guidelines forward. As Tula just mentioned, that this is not a final document. The next step is for us to gain input from the rest of the wider research ethics community, from people who are stakeholders, etc. So these guidelines have been included in the abstract book that everyone has. We would like you to, at your leisure, go through it and give your input regarding all the points that we have included in these guidelines. Obviously, this was a rapid 10-minute presentation in which everything could not be absorbed. Just give us what you feel is your take on these guidelines, which are meant to supplement existing guidelines, not replace them, and supplement them in disaster situations and research. And send these comments back to Tula, because we need all the input that we can get, and so that we can evolve something that is acceptable at a wider level.
What you have put together, Dr. Tula, you and your group, is this for just natural disasters, or how did you define disasters?
We have actually defined it in the abstract. It's not only for natural disasters, and again, we are not saying this is exhaustive, it has to be evolved, but we consider it can be taken for
man-made disasters like
as well.
war, etc.
And I personally believe every disaster is man-made, and then anyway, it's not natural.
First of all, I want to congratulate you and your group for this really important effort. I would urge that you not simply look upon it, though, as